In a quiet old town where cobblestone streets curved beneath fading lanterns, there stood a forgotten antique shop that time itself seemed to abandon. Its wooden sign creaked gently in the wind. Its windows were covered in dust, and behind those dusty windows sat dozens of silent clocks frozen in time. Once, the little shop had been filled with life. The steady rhythm of ticking hands and swinging pendulums used to echo through the streets like music. But now, there was only silence. Inside the dim shop, warm sunlight slipped through cracked windows, cutting to the dust floating lazily in the air. Rows of clocks lined the shelves like sleeping memories. Pocket watches, wall clocks, tiny brass clocks, tall wooden clocks, all silent, all still, and in the darkest corner of the room stood the largest clock of all, a magnificent grandfather clock made of dark walnut wood. Its brass pendulum no longer moved. The clock had not ticked in many years. Neither had the heart of the old man who owned the shop. The shop belonged to an elderly clockmaker named Mr. Solomon. Long ago, he had been known as the finest clockmaker in town. But after losing his wife many years ago, the grandfather clock stopped ticking, and so did he. Now, Mr. Solomon spent most afternoons sitting quietly behind his counter while silence surrounded him. Very few people entered the shop anymore, except one. One cool autumn afternoon, the old wooden door creaked open, and a young boy stepped inside. His name was Elias. He was only 12 years old. Slim and curious, with warm brown skin, curly dark hair, and bright hazel eyes filled with wonder. As he slowly walked to the shop, his eyes stopped on the giant grandfather clock standing silently in the corner. "It's beautiful," Elias whispered. Mr. Solomon's tired eyes lifted slightly. "It used to be." Elias stepped closer and gently brushed dust from the walnut wood. "Why did it stop?" Mr. Solomon lowered his eyes. Finally, after a long pause, he answered softly, "My wife died that day." His voice trembled. She loved this clock. Every evening, she would wind it before supper. He swallowed slowly. And the day she passed away, the pendulum stopped swinging. "The clocks grew silent after that," he whispered. "So did I." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elias quietly asked, "May I look inside it?" "There's no point," Mr. Solomon replied. "Maybe there is." Something in the boy's calm voice made the old man hesitate. Finally, he sighed, "Do as you wish." Carefully, Elias opened the wooden panel at the base of the clock. Dust swirled into the air. Inside were rusty springs, worn gears, and years of neglect. But instead of becoming discouraged, Elias smiled softly. Over the next several days, he returned after school to repair the clock piece by piece. He cleaned dusty gears. He polished tiny brass springs. He studied every mechanism with patient eyes. And while he worked, Mr. Solomon quietly watched from across the room. Some repairs failed. Sometimes the pendulum swung once before falling still again. One evening, the mechanism locked completely with a sharp metallic click. Mr. Solomon shook his head gently. "You see," he murmured, "some things are too broken." But Elias looked up and smiled softly. "No, it only means I haven't found a right way yet." Those words settled deeply into the old clockmaker's heart. The next afternoon, Elias returned carrying a tiny brass gear wrapped carefully in sackcloth. "You made it?" Mr. Solomon asked. Elias nodded proudly. "It took me 3 tries." For the first time in years, Mr. Solomon smiled. Together, they worked late into the evening beneath warm lantern light. Finally, Elias placed a new gear into the mechanism. Then he gently pushed the pendulum. Swing, swing, tick. Both of them froze. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed through the silent shop like the return of a heartbeat. The grandfather clock had begun to move again. Mr. Solomon stared at the clock in disbelief as tears gathered in his eyes. For years, the clock had stood silent, and somehow, so had his heart. Elias smiled warmly. Broken things are not useless, he said softly. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone who cares enough to repair them. The following weeks brought life back to the little shop. The dusty windows were cleaned, the shelves were repaired, and one by one, silent clocks began ticking again beneath Mr. Solomon's careful hands. Soon, the people of the town returned. Children pressed their faces against the windows to admire the clocks. And every morning before opening the shop, Mr. Solomon carefully wound the great-grandfather clock. Its deep, steady ticking filled the room with warmth and life. One bright spring morning, Elias returned to visit. Golden sunlight poured through clean windows, while dozens of clocks ticked together beautifully, like a symphony of time. As Elias turned to leave, Mr. Solomon called softly after him. "Thank you." The boy paused. "For what?" The old clockmaker placed a hand gently over his heart. "For reminding me that time does not end simply because something breaks." Moral lesson: sometimes pain can stop a heart the same way dust can stop a clock. But with patience, kindness, and hope, even the most broken things can begin again. If the story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you.